Welcome to ZOZO Sleepy Stories. We're thrilled to have you here for another cozy tale to spark your imagination. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends and family. Your support helps us keep the bedtime magic alive. Now, grab your blanket, get comfy, and let's dive into tonight's story. Good evening, my dear friend. Come, settle in. Let the weight of your day begin to lift, just for a little while. Tonight, we're going to travel back, not to a land of fairy tales, but to a time of remarkable strength. A time when ordinary people became quiet heroes against the biting cold of history. Let's journey together to the heart of the medieval world and listen to the whispers of winter. Before you drift off, perhaps take a moment to notice your own comfort. The softness of your pillow, the gentle weight of your blanket. And as you do, let's travel to a place where such comforts were the stuff of dreams. Imagine a small hut nestled in a forgotten corner of the English countryside, centuries and centuries ago. The walls are a humble mixture of woven sticks, mud, and straw, what they called wattle and daub. They're so thin you might hear the soft sigh of the wind as it weaves through the ancient sleeping trees outside. There are no glass windows here. Perhaps there's a small opening covered by a piece of animal hide, stretched thin and translucent, letting in only the faintest whisper of moonlight. Inside, the air is cold. It's a deep, penetrating cold that settles in your bones. The temperature within these simple walls is only a few degrees warmer than the frosty world outside. If a deep freeze has laid its shimmering blanket over the land, then inside it is just a little less frozen. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. At the center of this one-room home is the hearth. It's not a grand stone fireplace, but a simple pit dug into the earth floor, where a small fire sputters with a soft, crackling hum. It's a stubborn little fire, doing its very best to push back the immense darkness and the even bigger cold. The smoke doesn't rise through a chimney. It drifts lazily upwards, finding its way out through a small hole in the thatched roof or through the countless tiny cracks in the walls. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, a smell that clings to everything, a constant reminder of this single, precious source of warmth. The family huddled here doesn't have closets full of clothes. They have a few tunics made of rough, hand-spun wool, perhaps a heavy cloak that carries the faint, earthy scent of the animals it has brushed against. To sleep, they layer everything they own, hoping to create a small pocket of warmth against the long, dark night. And their beds? There are no soft mattresses or downy quilts. Most sleep on sacks, simple cloth bags stuffed with straw or hay. Imagine the soft rustle of the straw as they settle down, a sound like autumn leaves skittering across the ground. It's a humble bed, shared by the entire family, because in this world, warmth is found in closeness. The cold is more than just uncomfortable. It is a quiet danger that creeps in through the night. So every morning, waking up to the soft gray light of dawn, feeling the breath still warm in your lungs, is a small, uncelebrated miracle. It's a testament to the quiet ingenuity of these everyday people. Their story isn't one of grand battles or royal decrees. It's a story of grit, of resilience, and of the simple, powerful determination to see another sunrise. The house itself is a constant partner in this struggle. Those wattle and daub walls, as clever as they are no match for a true winter gale. The wind, a wild and invisible spirit, finds every tiny crack and crevice, dancing its way inside, swirling around the small room and reminding everyone of its power. There is no privacy here, only the shared experience of survival. The roof, a thick layer of thatch, looks charming from a distance, but after months of rain and snow, it begins to sag and leak. A soft, steady drip might be the only sound in the dead of night, a tiny drumbeat counting the hours until morning. And the floor is simply the earth itself, packed down by generations of footsteps. When the snow melts or the winter rains come, moisture seeps up from the ground, making the floor damp and cold. It's as if the cold attacks from all sides, from the thin walls, the leaky roof, and the frozen ground beneath. But these medieval peasants are not ones to surrender. They are resourceful. They pack the gaps in the walls with moss they gathered in the autumn, or stuff old rags into the draftiest corners. They huddle together, sharing their body heat, creating a small island of warmth in a vast ocean of cold. Their story is one of incredible cleverness born from necessity. The floor is a silent enemy in this nightly battle. That relentless cold seeps upward from the frozen earth, through the packed dirt and the thin layer of straw that is scattered upon it. This straw is a luxury, a thin barrier between their sleeping bodies and the deep chill of the ground. Over time, this layer of straw or dried rushes becomes a compressed mat, a living carpet of sorts. It might become home to fleas or other tiny creatures, a small, bustling world hidden from sight. But it provides a crucial layer of insulation. The bed, if they have one, is a simple wooden frame holding a larger sack of this same straw. It's a far cry from the beds we know. It rustles and shifts, and sharp stalks might poke through the cloth. Tossing and turning is not about finding a comfortable position. It's a necessary dance to keep the blood flowing, to prevent one side of your body from growing numb with cold. A good night's sleep in this world isn't about restful dreams. It's about waking up with all your fingers and toes still feeling warm. It's a quiet victory, won each and every night through stubbornness and ingenuity. The hero of this nightly story is, without a doubt, the hearth. That small, smoky fire is the beating heart of the home. It is the kitchen, where a simple pot of turnip and barley stew might bubble away, filling the small space with the comforting aroma of a hot meal. It is the only source of light after the sun has set, its flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. And it is the center of their world, where stories are told in hushed voices, where the day's small events are shared, and where the family simply sits together, watching the flames as if they were watching the world turn. Keeping this fire alive is not just a matter of comfort, it is a matter of survival. To let the fire die out in the middle of a winter night would be to invite the cold in to claim victory. And restarting a fire in the damp, freezing dark is an incredibly difficult task. There are no matches, no lighters. There is only flint and steel and the patient, careful work of coaxing a single spark into flame on a piece of dry tinder. So the family has a system. They bank the fire. Before settling down to sleep, they carefully bury the glowing embers under a thick blanket of ash. The ash insulates the coals, keeping them alive, just barely breathing through the long night. In the morning, with a gentle stir and the addition of fresh kindling, the fire can be brought back to life without the arduous process of starting anew. This skill, this fire banking, is an art passed down through generations. It is a piece of ancestral wisdom that holds the key to survival. And so, as the world outside grows still and the stars glitter like ice in the vast, dark sky, our medieval family settles down. They are not surrounded by luxury, but by the quiet strength of their own resilience. Their sleep is not one of pampered ease, but of hard-won peace. They have faced the day, and now they will face the night together, warmed by a small smoky fire and the enduring power of the human spirit. And in that quiet, humble hut, there is a profound lesson, a story of how even in the coldest and darkest of times, there is always a way to find warmth, a way to endure, and a way to welcome the dawn. Now, my friend, let our journey continue, leaving the frosty fields of the medieval countryside and drifting toward the polished halls of a different era. Let the image of that small, smoky hut dissolve like a dream, and in its place, let us conjure the tapestries and torchlight of Tudor England. For here, a different kind of story is about to unfold. It's not a story of survival against the cold, but of a brilliant, fiery spirit navigating the treacherous currents of a royal court. This is the story of Anne Boleyn. She did not enter the world destined for a throne. Born around the turn of the 16th century, she was the daughter of an ambitious diplomat, Thomas Boleyn, and a noblewoman, Elizabeth Howard. In the grand, intricate web of Tudor society, her birth was a quiet affair, hardly noticed by the great lords and ladies of the land. But from these seemingly modest beginnings, a life of extraordinary consequence was already taking root, a life that would one day change the course of English history forever. From her earliest years, there was something different about Anne. She was not just a pretty child. She possessed a mind that was quick and sharp as a needle, and a spirit that seemed to dance with an inner fire. Her family, recognizing this rare potential, did something unusual for a daughter of her station. They sent her away from England, not to a nunnery, but to the glittering, sophisticated courts of Europe, where her true education would begin. Her first stop was the court of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands. Imagine this young English girl stepping into a world of immense wealth and culture, a world of intricate diplomacy and refined courtly manners. Here, she was not just taught to sew and sing. She was immersed in the art of politics, learning the subtle language of power that was spoken in hushed tones in the corridors of palaces. She was a keen observer, absorbing every detail, every nuance of this dazzling new world. But it was in France that the true brilliance of Anne Boleyn was polished to a fine sheen. For several years, she served in the courts of two remarkable queens, Queen Claude and Queen Marguerite of Navarre. The French court was the epicenter of Renaissance culture, a place of poetry, music, fashion, and intellectual debate. While other young ladies of her age were perfecting their embroidery, Anne was mastering the art of conversation. She learned to be witty, to be charming, to flirt with a glance, and to debate with a smile. She learned how to command a room, not with loudness, but with intelligence and an undeniable charisma that drew people to her like moths to a flame. When she finally returned to England in the early 1520s, she was no longer just the daughter of an English diplomat. She was a woman transformed. She carried with her the sophistication of the continent, a sense of style, and a confidence that was utterly captivating. She was not beautiful in the conventional English way. The ideal at the time was fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Anne was dark, with lustrous black hair and eyes that were so dark they seemed to hold endless depths. Her admirers wrote that it was not her face that was so arresting, but the intelligence and spirit that shone from within. She had a way of moving, a grace and a purpose in her step that made it impossible to look away. When Anne Boleyn entered a room, the entire atmosphere seemed to shift. In an age when a woman's destiny was almost entirely determined by the man she married, Anne had other ideas. She had seen firsthand the power that intelligent women could wield in the courts of Europe, and she had no intention of fading quietly into the background. She was ambitious, not just for a good marriage, but for a life of consequence. And so, she arrived at the English court of King Henry VIII, a place that was, at first, a stage for her to play a supporting role. She became a maid of honor to the Queen, Catherine of Aragon. Queen Catherine was a woman of great piety and dignity, beloved by the English people. Anne served her dutifully, but even in the Queen's formidable shadow, Anne's own light could not be hidden. She danced with a grace that was mesmerizing. She spoke French as fluently as her native English, and she engaged in conversation with a wit and intelligence that set her apart from the other ladies of the court. The men of the court were enchanted by her. The women gossiped about this intriguing, dark-eyed girl with her French manners and her sharp tongue. The court, a place that thrived on whispers and intrigue, began to buzz with her name. It was only a matter of time before she captured the attention of the most powerful man in the kingdom, the king himself. King Henry VIII was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He was charismatic, athletic, and possessed of an insatiable appetite for life. His court was a playground of flirtations and secret affairs, and he had his pick of the beautiful women who vied for his attention. But when he turned his gaze to Anne, he found something entirely different. She did not blush and look away. She did not fall at his feet, eager for his favor. Instead, she met his gaze with her own. She challenged him, teased him, and engaged him in a dazzling dance of wit and intellect. And then she did the unthinkable. She refused him. Henry, a man who had never been denied, was utterly captivated. The more she kept him at a distance, the more obsessed he became. He wrote her passionate letters, filled with declarations of love and frustration at her reserve. He offered her the most coveted position a woman outside the royal marriage could hold, the role of his official mistress. It was a position of immense power and influence, and Anne, with breathtaking audacity, said no. She would not be another conquest, another passing fancy to be cast aside when the king grew bored. She had seen what happened to discarded mistresses. She wanted more. She wanted everything. If the King of England wanted her, he would have to do something that seemed impossible, something that would shake the foundations of his kingdom and the whole of Christendom. He would have to make her his wife. It was a gamble of such epic proportions that it left the entire court speechless. The king was already married. His wife, Queen Catherine, was not just any woman. She was the daughter of the powerful Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, and the aunt of the most powerful man in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. To cast her aside was not just a personal matter. it was a political earthquake. But Anne did not flinch. She had seen queens who wielded power from behind a demure smile, who influenced kingdoms with a well-placed whisper. She knew the game was dangerous, but it was a game she believed she could win. And so, standing in the torch-lit corridors of a palace, this remarkable young woman made a choice that would not only define her own destiny, but the destiny of a nation. The quiet girl who had left England years before had returned as a force of nature, and a storm was about to break. Let your mind drift now, deeper into this story, carried on the gentle current of my voice. The air in the English court is growing heavy, thick with secrets and the unspoken words that hang between glances. What began as a captivating flirtation between a king and a clever lady-in-waiting is slowly, inexorably, transforming into a crisis that will engulf the entire kingdom. King Henry is no longer just infatuated with Anne Boleyn. He is consumed by her. She is a fire in his blood, a puzzle he cannot solve, and his desire for her has become an obsession that will bend the world to its will. In his mind, she is more than a woman he wants. She is the woman he believes he needs, and he is a king who believes his needs are paramount. But there is a formidable obstacle standing in the way of his desire, his wife of 2 decades, Queen Catherine of Aragon. Catherine is a woman of immense strength and unshakable faith. She is the very picture of a queen, dignified, pious, and deeply respected by the people of England. She has stood by Henry's side, a loyal and devoted partner, and she has no intention of quietly stepping aside to make way for a younger, more vivacious rival. She is the queen, and in her eyes, and in the eyes of God, that is a sacred and unbreakable bond. In this era, divorce as we know it is simply not an option. Marriage is a holy sacrament, and only the Pope in Rome has the authority to grant an annulment, which would declare the marriage invalid from the start. But on what grounds could Henry possibly ask for such a thing? His marriage to Catherine had been a celebrated union, a cornerstone of European politics for 20 years. Henry, however, is a man who can convince himself of anything. He begins to search for a reason, a justification that will satisfy his conscience and, more importantly, the world. He finds it in the pages of the Old Testament, in a passage from the book of Leviticus that forbids a man from marrying his brother's widow. Catherine had, for a very brief time, been married to Henry's older brother Arthur, before Arthur's untimely death. At the time, the Pope had granted a special dispensation, a formal permission for Henry to marry her, declaring that the first marriage had never been consummated and was therefore not a true marriage in the eyes of the Church. But now, years later, Henry seizes upon this old story. He declares that the Pope had no right to overrule God's law. He proclaims that his marriage to Catherine has been cursed from the beginning. And the proof of this curse? Catherine's failure to give him a male heir. She had borne him several children, but only one, a daughter named Mary, had survived infancy. For Henry, a king obsessed with securing his dynasty, this is a sign of divine displeasure. His soul, he insists, is in peril. His kingdom is at risk. The only way to save both is to annul his marriage and find a new wife who can give him a son. And he has the perfect candidate in mind. Anne, for her part, plays her role with masterful precision. She understands the delicate and dangerous game she is in. She keeps Henry tantalizingly out of reach, a prize he can see but not possess. She stokes the fires of his passion with her letters and her clever conversation, but she never yields. Every word, every glance is carefully measured. She is not simply waiting for him to marry her, she is actively positioning herself, advising him, encouraging his theological arguments, and making it clear that she is not just a beautiful woman, but a partner worthy of a crown. The court, once a place of glittering parties and courtly games, becomes a minefield of shifting loyalties. It divides into two distinct camps. There are those who see the writing on the wall, who recognize that power is shifting away from the old queen and toward this new, dazzling woman. They begin to court Anne's favor, hoping to rise with her. These are the new men, ambitious politicians and thinkers who are open to religious reform and see Anne as their champion. Then there are the others, the old, established noble families who are fiercely loyal to Queen Catherine. They are horrified by the king's actions, seeing them as an affront to tradition, to the rightful queen, and to God himself. They whisper in the shadows, praying for the king to come to his senses and viewing Anne as a wicked temptress, a schemer who has bewitched their noble king. The very air crackles with tension. Old friendships fray, families are divided, and the whispers in the corridors of power grow louder and more dangerous. The crisis, which becomes known as the King's Great Matter, sends shockwaves across Europe. Diplomats scribble frantic letters to their masters in Rome, Spain, and France. The Pope, Clement VII, is caught in an impossible position. He does not want to anger Henry, the powerful King of England. But he cannot afford to anger Catherine's nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, whose armies have recently sacked Rome and are now effectively holding the Pope hostage. The emperor is furious at the suggestion that his aunt be cast aside and her daughter, Mary, be declared illegitimate. He will not stand for it. And so, the months stretch into years. Henry's frustration mounts. He sends envoys to Rome, bombarding the Pope with legal arguments, theological treatises, and veiled threats. He hires the best scholars in Europe to find precedents and loopholes that will support his case. But the Church, an ancient and immovable institution, refuses to bend to his will. Through it all, Henry's obsession with Anne only deepens. His courtship of her has become something far more significant than a personal affair. It has become a direct challenge to the authority of the Pope, a questioning of the very foundations of religious and political life in England. Anne is no longer just a woman trying to capture a king's heart. She has become the catalyst for a revolution. She is unwittingly dragging an entire kingdom toward a future that no one can predict, into uncharted and dangerous waters from which there can be no return. The game has begun, and the stakes are higher than anyone could have ever imagined. The crown of England, the soul of a king, and the future of a nation all hang in the balance, caught in the brilliant, determined gaze of Anne Boleyn. My friend, let the world outside fade away completely now. Let there be only the sound of my voice and the story that unfolds in the quiet chambers of your mind. We find ourselves in a kingdom holding its breath, a kingdom on the precipice of a monumental change. For nearly 7 long, agonizing years, England has been caught in the grip of the King's Great Matter, a struggle that has tested loyalties, shattered alliances, and pushed a nation to the brink. And at the center of it all is Anne Boleyn, the woman whose ambition and allure have set this incredible series of events in motion. Finally, after years of deadlock and frustration, Henry VIII decides he can wait no longer. He is a king, after all, and he will not be dictated to by a pope who is, in his eyes, merely a pawn of foreign powers. He will take matters into his own hands. In January of 1533, in a secret ceremony, hidden from the prying eyes of the court and the world, he marries Anne Boleyn. It is a breathtakingly bold and dangerous act. In the eyes of the Catholic Church and most of Europe, he is still married to Catherine of Aragon, making this new union not just invalid, but a profound sin. But Henry is resolute. He has a new Archbishop of Canterbury, the reform-minded Thomas Cranmer, who is willing to do what the Pope would not. Cranmer convenes a court in England, which dutifully declares Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. His marriage to Anne, who is now pregnant with what Henry is certain will be his long-awaited son and heir, is declared valid. The path is cleared. By June, the city of London is abuzz with preparations for a spectacle of breathtaking grandeur, the coronation of a new queen. Anne Boleyn, the dark-eyed girl who had once been a lady-in-waiting, is to be crowned Queen of England at the hallowed Westminster Abbey. It should be the ultimate moment of triumph, the culmination of a 7-year gamble that has paid off in the most spectacular fashion. But, as Anne travels in a magnificent procession through the streets of London, the atmosphere is not one of universal joy. The people line the streets, their faces a mixture of curiosity, awe, and quiet resentment. Some cheer for their new, beautiful queen, caught up in the splendor of the occasion. But many others stand in stony silence, their hearts still loyal to the woman they see as their true queen, the pious and long-suffering Catherine, who has been banished from court and forced into a lonely exile. They mutter prayers for Catherine and whisper that this new queen, with her foreign manners and her reputation for ambition, is a curse upon the kingdom. Anne enters her queenship not as a beloved fairy tale princess, but as a controversial and divisive figure. She is everything her predecessor was not. Where Catherine was humble, traditional, and devout, Anne is dazzling, fashionable, and fiercely intelligent. She commands the court with a sharp wit and a political savvy that both impresses and intimidates those around her. She refuses to be a passive queen consort. She is a partner in power, and she makes powerful enemies with a speed that is both astonishing and dangerous. Her position, which seems so secure on the surface, is in reality built on a foundation of sand. Everything, her crown, her power, the king's love, her very life, rests on one single, crucial thing: her ability to give Henry the son he so desperately craves. She knows this with a chilling clarity. She is no longer just Henry's passionate love. She is the vessel for the future of the Tudor dynasty. Early in her pregnancy, both she and Henry are filled with joyful certainty. Astrologers and physicians predict a boy. The kingdom waits in breathless anticipation. But in September of 1533, in the palace at Greenwich, Anne gives birth not to a prince but to a healthy and red-haired baby girl. They name her Elizabeth. To her immense credit, Anne masks her profound disappointment with a public show of grace. She insists that a daughter is a wonderful blessing, and that a son will surely follow. But Henry is less able to hide his feelings. The grand tournament planned to celebrate the birth of a prince is abruptly cancelled. The look in his eyes, once filled with nothing but adoration for her, now holds a flicker of doubt, a shadow of the disappointment that will grow in the coming years. Still, for a time, Anne's star shines with an almost blinding brilliance. She reshapes the English court, filling it with her friends and family, and promoting the cause of religious reform that she has come to champion. She is crowned with the sacred oil of Saint Edward, a holy rite that was usually reserved only for reigning monarchs, not their consorts, a sign of the extraordinary status Henry has given her. Her influence is immense. Foreign ambassadors, who once dismissed her as a passing fancy, now seek her favor, knowing that her voice is one of the most powerful in the kingdom. Courtiers and politicians realign their loyalties, understanding that to be out of favor with Queen Anne is to be out of favor with the king himself. And, under her influence, Henry takes the final, irrevocable step. He breaks with Rome completely. He passes the Act of Supremacy, which declares that he, the King of England, and not the Pope, is the supreme head of the Church of England. He does this for many reasons: for power, for wealth, for reform. But at its heart, this monumental decision is made to ensure one thing: that his marriage to Anne can never be questioned, and that their children will be the undisputed heirs to the throne. Anne has achieved the impossible. She has won the ultimate prize. But even as she stands at the pinnacle of her power, surrounded by luxury and influence, dark clouds are beginning to gather on the horizon. Her friends whisper that her sharp tongue is making her enemies. Her rivals, those who have never forgiven her for replacing Catherine, are circling like patient predators, waiting for any sign of weakness. And the king, a man whose passions are as intense as they are fleeting, is already beginning to grow restless. The brilliant, challenging woman for whom he broke the world is beginning to seem less like a prize and more like a burden. Anne Boleyn has won the throne, but holding on to it will require more than intelligence, more than ambition, and even more than the king's love. It will require a son, and time is running out. Come, my friend, let us continue our journey. Let the gentle rhythm of the story soothe you as we watch the brilliant star of Queen Anne begin its slow, heartbreaking descent. She has climbed higher than any woman of her time could have dreamed, a testament to her intelligence and will. But in the treacherous world of the Tudor court, the summit is a precarious place to stand. The higher you rise, the more devastating the fall. Almost from the moment the crown is placed upon her head, the delicate foundation of her world begins to show cracks. At the very heart of her struggle is the relentless, all-consuming pressure to produce a male heir. Her first child, the bright and spirited Elizabeth, is a delight. But she is not the son that King Henry had wagered his kingdom for. He had broken with the Church, defied the Pope, and alienated half of Europe, all in the belief that Anne would give him a prince to secure the Tudor dynasty. The birth of a daughter feels like a cruel joke, a sign that perhaps his great gamble was a mistake. The clock is ticking, and Anne knows it better than anyone. She throws herself into the task of providing an heir with a desperate urgency. In the years that follow Elizabeth's birth, she endures several more pregnancies, each one a fragile vessel of hope for both her and the king. But each pregnancy ends in heartbreak. There are miscarriages, devastating losses that leave her not only physically weakened, but emotionally shattered. Imagine the quiet despair in the royal apartments after each loss. The hushed whispers of the ladies in waiting, the grim face of the king, and Anne, left alone with her grief and the terrifying knowledge that her value in Henry's eyes is diminishing with each failure. Each lost child is another stone chipped away from the foundation of her queenship, another crack in the mirror of the king's love. Henry, a man whose passions burn brightly but can be extinguished just as quickly, begins to pull away. The passionate devotion he once showed her curdles into impatience and disappointment. He had seen her as the answer to all his problems, the woman blessed by God to give him a son. Now, he begins to wonder if he was wrong. He starts to believe that perhaps this marriage, too, is cursed. Anne, who has never been one to suffer in silence, does not accept this growing distance with quiet submission. That is not her nature. She argues with him. She pleads. She demands that he remember the love they once shared and the sacrifices they made for each other. She fights to keep her place in his heart and at his side. But the very qualities that had once enchanted him, her fire, her intelligence, her refusal to be a docile ornament, now begin to irritate him. He is the king, and he is growing tired of a queen who challenges him, who speaks her mind so freely. He begins to long for peace, for obedience, for a softer, more gentle presence. And outside the strained confines of the royal chambers, Anne's enemies are sensing their opportunity. The nobles who had always remained loyal to Catherine of Aragon, who had gritted their teeth and tolerated Anne's rise, now see their chance. They begin to scheme in the shadows, whispering poisons into the ever-receptive ears of the courtiers. They never forgave her for what they saw as the usurpation of the true queen, and they are eager for her downfall. Even the common people who once were just wary of her have turned against her. They blame her for the religious turmoil that has gripped the kingdom since the break with Rome. Monasteries are being closed, ancient traditions are being swept away, and in the popular imagination, it is all the fault of the new queen, whom they scornfully call the Great Whore. And then, into this volatile atmosphere, a new figure emerges at court, a young lady-in-waiting named Jane Seymour. She is the physical and temperamental opposite of Anne. Where Anne is dark and fiery, Jane is fair and placid. Where Anne is witty and challenging, Jane is quiet, gentle, and demure. She is everything that Anne is not, and she is everything that the weary king now craves. Henry's gaze, which once followed Anne's every move, begins to wander. He finds solace in Jane's soothing presence. She does not argue with him or make demands. She offers him quiet adoration and unquestioning compliance. It is a dangerous shift in the delicate balance of power, and Anne, with her sharp political instincts, sees it happening with terrifying clarity. She makes desperate attempts to win back the king's affection. She lavishes him with attention. She plans magnificent court entertainments. She promises him that the next child will be a son. She begs him for patience, for a little more time. But it is too late. The king, a man ruled by his whims and his conviction that his will is God's will, has already begun to imagine a life without her. He is already thinking of how he can rid himself of this second, inconvenient wife and take a third. Anne's political enemies, chief among them the king's pragmatic and ruthless chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, see the change in the king's heart. Cromwell had once been Anne's greatest ally, a key architect of her rise and the break with Rome. But now their political goals have diverged. and Cromwell sees that the Queen has become an obstacle, a liability. He recognizes that his own survival depends on his ability to give the king what he wants. And what the king now wants is a way out of his marriage to Anne. Cromwell and the others begin to lay the groundwork for her destruction. They move quietly, carefully, gathering whispers, twisting rumors, and looking for witnesses who can be persuaded to speak against the Queen. The woman who had played the game of court politics with such masterful skill is now finding herself outmaneuvered. She is losing ground, her allies are melting away, and the circle of her enemies is tightening around her. She had won her crown through sheer force of will, through intelligence and courage. But in the brutal, unforgiving world of Henry's court, past victories count for nothing. Only present success matters, and Anne's string of heartbreaking failures has left her vulnerable. Her enemies are sharpening their knives, and the Queen who had once shattered a kingdom is about to find out how quickly and how ruthlessly that kingdom can turn and shatter her. Let your breathing slow, my friend, and sink deeper into the quiet of the night. We are entering the darkest corridors of our story now, a place of shadows and whispers, where the fate of a queen is being decided not on a battlefield, but in the secret conversations of ambitious men. The enemies of Anne Boleyn do not come for her with swords and armor. They come with carefully chosen words, with twisted truths, and with the silent, deadly poison of betrayal. In the back rooms of the palace, away from the glittering festivities of the court, a conspiracy is brewing. It is patient, it is methodical, and it is led by the most powerful man in England after the king himself, Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell, the blacksmith's son who had risen to become the king's chief minister, was once Anne's most crucial ally. They had worked together to engineer the break with Rome and place her on the throne. Theirs was an alliance built on shared ambition and a desire for religious reform. But now, that alliance has crumbled into dust. Their visions for the future of England have clashed. Anne, a passionate advocate for reform, wanted to use the wealth seized from the dissolved monasteries to fund charitable and educational institutions. Cromwell, the ultimate pragmatist, wanted that wealth to flow directly into the king's coffers, securing the stability of the state and his own position within it. Anne's outspokenness, her intelligence, and her tendency to interfere in what Cromwell saw as his political domain had made her a dangerous and unpredictable rival. And Cromwell knows, with the keen instinct of a born survivor, that the king's heart has changed. He has seen the king's growing irritation with Anne's fiery temperament, and he has noted the king's tender and frequent glances toward the quiet, submissive Jane Seymour. Love has curdled into suspicion, and Henry is looking for an escape. Anne finds herself increasingly isolated. She has few true friends left at court. Many of her allies have been alienated by her sharp tongue or have quietly switched their allegiance to the rising star of the Seymours. Her famous charm, the very weapon that had won her a crown, now seems to grate on the nerves of a court that is hungry for a gentler, more conventional queen. And Jane Seymour, a pawn in the game but a powerful one, waits demurely in the wings, a constant, silent reproach to Anne's fading fire. It is Cromwell who makes the first move. He understands the king's predicament. Henry wants to be rid of Anne, but another long, drawn-out annulment process like the one he endured with Catherine would be a public humiliation. It would make him look foolish and suggest that this second marriage was also a mistake, another sign of God's displeasure. He needs a reason to remove her that is swift, final, and places all the blame squarely on her. Cromwell offers him the perfect, horrifying solution. What if Anne is not just a disappointing wife, but a treacherous one? What if she could be removed not by a lengthy legal process, but by a swift and brutal disgrace? And so, the plot begins to take shape. Cromwell and his agents start to construct a case against the Queen, a case built not on evidence, but on a web of monstrous and shocking lies. The accusations they devise are beyond anything the court could have imagined. They will accuse her of adultery with multiple men from her own court. They will accuse her of incest with her beloved brother, George Boleyn, and they will accuse her of conspiring with her lovers to bring about the king's death, the ultimate crime of high treason. In one stroke, they will paint Anne, the proud and brilliant queen, as a depraved monster, a traitor to her husband and her king, a threat to the very stability of the realm. Cromwell's machine of state swings into action. He begins to carefully gather his evidence. He orders the arrest of several men in Anne's inner circle, including a court musician, Mark Smeaton, and several gentlemen of the king's privy chamber. Under brutal torture, Smeaton confesses to having been the queen's lover. His confession, extracted under unimaginable pain, becomes the cornerstone of the case. The other men, noblemen of high standing, deny the charges vehemently, but in the atmosphere of fear and paranoia that Cromwell has created, their denials mean little. Cromwell's agents twist innocent acts of courtly flirtation, a shared glance, a witty remark, a gentle touch of the hand, into damning proof of guilt. They build a narrative of debauchery and treason that is filled with contradictions and logistical impossibilities. The alleged crimes are said to have taken place on dates when the Queen was known to be elsewhere. But in the court of Henry VIII, the truth has become a flexible commodity. The truth is whatever the king needs it to be. The final, devastating blow is the arrest of Anne's own brother, George Boleyn, Lord Rochford. He is a man known for his wit, his charm, and his close, affectionate relationship with his sister. This relationship is now twisted into the most unnatural of crimes: incest. The charge is designed to utterly destroy Anne's reputation and horrify the kingdom. Anne, who is not blind to the machinations of the court, senses the net tightening around her. She sees her friends arrested. She hears the whispers growing louder, and she knows that something terrible is happening. She tries desperately to appeal to Henry, to the man who had once written her passionate love letters and moved heaven and earth to marry her. She writes to him. She asks to see him. She tries to remind him of the love they once shared. But it is useless. The king refuses to meet her gaze. He has already hardened his heart against her and has retreated behind the wall of accusations that Cromwell has so conveniently built for him. In May of 1536, the inevitable happens. Queen Anne Boleyn is arrested on charges of treason, adultery, and incest. She is taken from her splendid apartments at Greenwich Palace and escorted by barge down the River Thames to the grim, imposing fortress of the Tower of London. As the heavy, iron-studded gates of the Traitor's Gate swing shut behind her, a chilling realization must have washed over her. She is no longer a queen. She is a prisoner. She is a pawn in a brutal game that she had once played with such mastery, but which has now turned against her with deadly force. The web of betrayal, spun in the shadows by men she had once trusted, has now completely enveloped her. And alone in a cold stone cell in the tower, with the sound of the river lapping against the ancient walls, Anne Boleyn waits for the final, terrible move in this game, where the prize is her life. My friend, allow yourself to sink into a state of deep relaxation. Let the story be a gentle whisper in the darkness, a tale of courage in the face of an unstoppable tide. We find ourselves now within the cold, formidable walls of the Tower of London, in the great hall where a queen is about to be put on public trial for her life. Anne Boleyn stands before a tribunal of her peers, a gathering of the most powerful nobles in the land. As she looks at their faces, she must see a gallery of bitter ironies. Many of these men, these dukes, these earls, owe their titles, their wealth, and their positions at court to her and her family's rise to power. They had once bowed to her, flattered her, and sought her favor. Now, they sit in solemn judgment, their faces like stone masks, ready to condemn the woman who had once been the architect of their fortunes. They are there to erase her, to participate in the political theater that will give the king the freedom he desires. The charges read out against her are designed to shock and horrify the kingdom. She is accused of adultery with 5 men, including the court musician Mark Smeaton and several gentlemen of the king's own household. She is accused of the heinous crime of incest with her own brother, George Boleyn, and she is accused of high treason, of having conspired to plot the king's death so that she could marry one of her lovers. In any other circumstance, such accusations against a reigning queen would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. They are so wild, so extreme, so utterly out of character for the intelligent, politically astute woman who had fought so hard to become queen. But this is not a trial about truth. It is a grim performance, a carefully scripted tragedy designed for one purpose: to deliver a guilty verdict and give King Henry VIII the legal justification he needs to dispose of his wife and marry Jane Seymour. It is a spectacle of legality, a thin and brittle veil drawn over an act of brutal political expediency. But if her enemies expect Anne to weep, to beg, or to collapse in fear, they are sorely mistaken. She defends herself not with tears, but with the same fiery intelligence and composure that had once captivated a king. She stands before the court, not as a cowering prisoner, but as a queen. She listens to each accusation and denies them all, one by one, with a calm precision and a quiet dignity that astonishes even those who have come to see her condemned. She speaks with clarity and force, dissecting the flimsy evidence presented against her. She reminds the court of her status, that she was not just a king's wife, but a queen anointed with the sacred oil, a queen chosen by God and consecrated in a holy ceremony. She speaks of her unwavering loyalty to the king, of the sacrifices she made to be with him, and of the genuine love she had once borne him. Her defense is brilliant, logical, and moving. An eyewitness at the trial would later write that she had made her case so well that no one watching could have believed her to be guilty. But it is all for nothing. The verdict was never in doubt. It had been decided in the king's private chambers long before the trial even began. The trial is merely for show, a way to give the king's actions the appearance of justice. witness after witness is brought forward to speak against her. Most of them have been coerced, bribed, or tortured into giving the testimony that Cromwell needs. The timeline of the alleged crimes makes no sense. The evidence presented is contradictory and based on little more than rumor and hearsay. But in this courtroom, the truth is irrelevant. The nobles deliver their verdict. Anne Boleyn is found guilty on all charges. A few days earlier, her brother George and the other 4 men accused with her had faced their own trials and had also been found guilty. They are all sentenced to death. The sentence is read aloud. Anne is to be executed. The method, at the king's discretion, will either be burning at the stake or beheading. It is a terrifying sentence, but even in this moment of ultimate defeat, Anne does not break. She stands tall, her face pale but her expression serene, her spirit fiercely intact. In the silence that follows the verdict, she is allowed to speak one last time to the court. With a voice that does not tremble, she maintains her innocence. She does not curse the king or her accusers. Instead, she speaks of her readiness to die and expresses her hope that God will have mercy on her soul and on the souls of those who have condemned her. Her composure and her grace in this final, devastating moment are her last act of defiance, a testament to a spirit that could not be crushed, even by a king. As she is led out of the great hall, the heavy doors closing behind her, a collective sigh of relief seems to pass through the court. The storm that was Anne Boleyn, the brilliant, dangerous, and unforgettable woman who had turned their world upside down, is nearly over. They believe they are closing a chapter, erasing a mistake, but they do not understand. They are not ending her story. They are ensuring its immortality. In their betrayal and their carefully staged tragedy, they are transforming Anne Boleyn from a historical figure into a legend, a story that will be told and retold for centuries to come. A story that will continue to fascinate and move the hearts of those who hear it, even now, in the quiet of this peaceful night. Breathe deeply, my friend, and let the peace of the night settle over you. Our story is drawing to its quiet, inevitable conclusion. We return one last time to the cold, gray stones of the Tower of London, where Anne Boleyn, no longer a queen but a condemned prisoner, awaits her final dawn. Even in these last, terrible days facing the end of her extraordinary life, Anne refuses to crumble into despair. There is a strength in her, a core of resilience that even the king's wrath cannot extinguish. In the echoing silence of her stone chamber, she prepares herself not for a battle, but for a final, graceful surrender to her fate. She spends hours in prayer. Imagine her kneeling on the hard, cold floor, the faint light from a narrow window casting a pale glow on her face. Her voice is not filled with frantic pleading, but with a steady calm. She does not confess to the monstrous crimes she has been accused of, for in her heart and before her God, she believes she is innocent. She tells the constable of the tower that she is not afraid to die, but that she worries deeply for the innocent souls who have been condemned with her. And she prays for her daughter, the little girl Elizabeth, now motherless and declared illegitimate, left to the mercy of a court that has just destroyed her mother. The few ladies-in-waiting who have remained loyal to her, who share her captivity in the tower, weep for her. But it is Anne who comforts them. In a moment of dark, sharp humor, The very wit that had once charmed a court, she jokes about her own execution. She has heard that the king, in a final act of what he might consider mercy, is bringing an expert swordsman from France to carry out the sentence. As a sword is considered a swifter and more noble instrument than the common executioner's axe, Anne touches her own slender neck and remarks wryly to her ladies that she has heard the executioner is very good, and she has but a little neck. She will be known in history, she says, as Queen Anne Lackhead. In that moment of grim laughter, the stubborn, brilliant spark of the woman she has always been shines through the darkness. Meanwhile, outside the tower walls, King Henry VIII shows no sign of regret or hesitation. His focus has already shifted. He has turned his full attention to Jane Seymour. Even as the final date for Anne's execution is being set, the king is sending love letters and gifts to Jane, and the court is already buzzing with plans for his third wedding. For Anne, locked away in her cell, news of this must have been the final, most painful betrayal. The man for whom she had risked everything, the man who had torn down the established order of a kingdom to have her, was not even waiting for her to be in her grave before moving on to her replacement. It must have been the deepest and most bitter cut of all. On the evening of May 18th, 1536, Anne is told the end will come the following morning. That night, she does not sleep. Instead, she spends her final hours with her almoner, her priest, praying and taking communion. She asks God for the strength to face her end with dignity, and she prays for forgiveness for all those who have wronged her. She is preparing her soul for its final journey, finding a quiet peace that defies the violence that awaits her. The king's mercy in providing a swordsman is a strange and complex gesture. It is perhaps born less out of concern for Anne's comfort and more out of a desire for his own. A clean, swift execution will cause less of a public spectacle, a less brutal end for the woman who was once his great love. It is a small gesture that does little to erase the immense cruelty of her fate. As the first light of dawn begins to creep into the sky, painting the clouds in shades of gray and rose, Anne begins to dress for her final public appearance. She chooses her garments with great care. She wears a gown of dark gray damask, trimmed with ermine fur, and beneath it a kirtle of deep crimson, the color of Catholic martyrdom, a final, silent statement of her faith and, perhaps, her innocence. She carefully pins up her long dark hair and tucks it beneath a simple, elegant coif, preparing herself for the blade with a practicality that is both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. The Tower of London is quiet in the early morning. A cold mist hangs in the air, clinging to the ancient stones and swirling around the courtyard where a black-draped scaffold has been erected. Anne Boleyn, who was once a queen, a mother, a brilliant political player, and a woman who changed the course of history, takes a deep breath and steps forward to meet her destiny. There will be no hysterics, no desperate pleas for mercy. She has already found her peace. All that is left is one final act of courage, one last display of the extraordinary dignity that has defined her, even in the face of judgment, betrayal, and death. Her life is ending, but her story, the one that has captivated the world for centuries, is about to become eternal. And so, my friend, we come to the final scene of this poignant tale. Let your mind be still, and let us bear witness to the end of a queen and the birth of a legend. The morning of May 19th, 1536, is cold and overcast. Within the secure walls of the Tower of London, a small, somber crowd has gathered on the Tower Green. There are courtiers, city officials, and guards. A hand-picked group of witnesses there to observe the final act of this royal tragedy. The silence is heavy, profound, as if the ancient stone walls themselves are holding their breath. Anne Boleyn ascends the few steps of the newly built scaffold. She stands tall and composed, her dark gray gown a stark contrast to the pale skin of her face. She appears calm, her expression serene. There are no tears, no signs of the terror that must surely be close to her heart. She faces her death with the same fierce dignity and unwavering self-control that had once shaken a kingdom to its very foundations. She turns to the small crowd and begins to speak, her voice clear and steady in the quiet morning air. Her final words are chosen with extraordinary care. This is her last chance to shape her own narrative, and she does not use it to rail against her enemies or proclaim her innocence in defiant terms. She knows that any word against the king could endanger her daughter, Elizabeth. So, she plays the role of the loyal subject to the very end. She does not accuse the king. Instead, she praises him, calling him a good and gentle lord. She asks the people to pray for him, for his health and his long reign. It is a masterful, heartbreaking speech. In her final moments, she offers the world not a confession of guilt, but an act of forgiveness and loyalty. A final, poignant gesture that silences her critics and speaks volumes to those who understood the terrible pressure she was under. Her courage in this moment is absolute, stunning even those who had orchestrated her downfall. She gives some coins to her weeping ladies-in-waiting and offers them words of comfort. Then she removes her ermine cloak and her headdress. One of her ladies ties a small white blindfold over her eyes. The French executioner, a man renowned for his skill, steps forward, holding not a heavy axe but a long, sharp sword. Anne kneels upright on the straw-strewn scaffold, her posture still proud and regal. She folds her hands and begins to pray, her lips moving silently, her face lifted toward the gray sky. She repeats over and over, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul." The executioner, it is said, was so moved by her composure that he found it difficult to strike. To distract her, he called out, "Where is my sword?" Anne turned her head slightly, and in that instant the sword flashed through the air. It was silent, swift, and mercifully clean. And in a single moment, Anne Boleyn, the queen who had changed history, the mother, the scholar, the revolutionary, was gone. Her end is as shocking as her life was dazzling. There is no grand funeral, no royal tomb. In a final act of indignity, no proper coffin has been prepared for her. Her ladies wrap her body and head in a white cloth, and she is laid to rest in an old arrow chest, buried in an unmarked grave in the Tower's chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. A queen who was once crowned in splendor, now laid in the earth without ceremony, as if the world was trying to forget she had ever existed. But Anne's story does not end in that cold, unmarked grave. Her true legacy, the one that would ultimately vindicate her, was her daughter. Elizabeth, the baby girl whose birth had been such a bitter disappointment to her father, would one day ascend the throne, and she would not be just any monarch. She would become Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, one of the greatest and most beloved rulers in English history. Elizabeth's long and glorious reign, known as the Golden Age, would see England flourish. It would be an era of exploration, of artistic flowering with writers like Shakespeare, and of military victory, most famously against the Spanish Armada. And in this powerful, intelligent, and resilient queen, the world saw the unmistakable spirit of her mother. Elizabeth inherited Anne's sharp mind, her fierce courage, and her unyielding determination. Through her daughter, Anne's bloodline not only survived, but triumphed. Anne Boleyn's life was a brilliant, tragic, and revolutionary force. Her ambition was the catalyst that triggered England's historic break with the Roman Catholic Church and the birth of the Church of England. Her dramatic fall from grace served as a chilling reminder of the absolute and often brutal power of the Tudor monarchy. Yet, through her daughter, her legacy burned brighter than any crown she had ever worn. In the end, Anne Boleyn achieved a kind of immortality, not by surviving, but by the indelible and permanent mark she left on the history of a nation. Her story became a timeless tale of ambition, love, betrayal, and the extraordinary power of a single individual to change the world. And so, we leave her, resting at last, her story now a gentle echo in the vast silence of history. Now, my friend, let us leave the misty shores of Tudor England behind. Let the grand, tragic story of Anne Boleyn dissolve like a morning fog, and let us travel forward in time and across a vast ocean. Our journey takes us to a new world, a place of rugged coastlines and burgeoning cities, a place simmering with a new kind of energy. We arrive in the American colonies in the years leading up to 1773. The relationship between the colonies and their mother country, Great Britain, once a source of pride and security, has grown strained and sour. It feels like a pot of water that has been left over a fire for too long, simmering with resentment, suspicion, and a quiet, growing anger that is about to boil over. This trouble didn't begin with tea. The roots of this discontent run much deeper. Years earlier, a law called the Stamp Act had been passed by the British Parliament, a body thousands of miles away where the colonists had no elected representatives to speak for them. This act placed a tax on all sorts of paper goods, everything from newspapers and legal documents to playing cards. The colonists were outraged. It wasn't the cost of the tax that angered them so much as the principle. They were being taxed without their consent, a violation of what they saw as their fundamental rights as Englishmen. Their protests were loud and fierce. Merchants organized boycotts of British goods. Passionate writers and orators like Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry filled pamphlets and newspapers with fiery arguments about liberty and the tyranny of taxation without representation. The pressure was so intense that Parliament eventually backed down and repealed the Stamp Act. There was a brief moment of celebration, a feeling that their voices had been heard. But the victory was short-lived. It was followed by other laws, other taxes. The Townshend Acts placed duties on essential imported goods like glass, paper, lead, and paint. Each new law felt like another insult, another reminder that in the eyes of the British government, the colonists were not equal partners in the empire, but simply a source of revenue, subjects to be ruled from afar. With each passing year, the frustration deepened. The colonists began to realize, with a slow and dawning horror, that Britain wasn't just misunderstanding them. It seemed that Britain didn't care to understand them at all. The arguments about rights and representation that seemed so clear and just to them were dismissed in London as the insolent grumblings of ungrateful children. It was never really about the money. The taxes themselves were often quite small. What burned in the hearts of the colonists was the feeling of being disrespected, of being treated as second-class citizens in their own land. They had built their lives on this rugged continent, carved communities out of the wilderness, and they believed they had earned the right to govern their own affairs. The city of Boston, Massachusetts, became the fiery heart of this growing resistance movement. It was a bustling port city, filled with outspoken merchants, fiery journalists, and a secret society of patriots who call themselves the Sons of Liberty. The presence of British soldiers sent to keep order only made the situation more volatile. The soldiers, or redcoats, were a constant, visible reminder of British authority, and tensions between them and the citizens of Boston were always high. In 1770, those tensions exploded into violence. A street brawl between a mob of angry colonists and a squad of British soldiers ended with the soldiers firing into the crowd. 5 civilians were killed. The event was dubbed the Boston Massacre, and news of it, accompanied by dramatic engravings showing soldiers firing on unarmed citizens, spread through the colonies like wildfire. Blood had now been spilled on the cobblestone streets. The trust that had once existed between the colonies and Great Britain was shattered, perhaps beyond repair. By the year 1773, the colonies were teetering on a knife's edge. It would only take one more perceived injustice, one final insult, to push them from protest into open defiance. And that final insult did not come in the form of a new army or a harsh new law. It came in a much quieter, more seemingly harmless form. It came in the shape of hundreds of wooden chests, stacked in the holds of 3 tall ships, chests filled to the brim with tea. The colonists did not know it yet, but the fate of that tea and the events that would unfold on a cold winter's night in Boston Harbor would change the course of history. A storm was gathering, a storm that smelled not of rain, but of salt water and steeped tea leaves. Settle deeper into your rest, my friend, and let the story carry you. We are in a time of great tension, where a simple cup of tea is about to become a symbol of a struggle for liberty. In 1773, the British Parliament, sitting in its grand halls in London, made a decision that it thought was clever and pragmatic. It was a decision that would have unforeseen and explosive consequences. The mighty British East India Company, a massive trading corporation that was vital to the British economy, was in serious financial trouble. It had a huge surplus of tea sitting in its warehouses in London, and it desperately needed to sell it. To solve this problem, Parliament passed a new law, the Tea Act. On the surface, the Tea Act seemed like a wonderful deal for the American colonists. The law gave the British East India Company a monopoly on the tea trade to the colonies. It allowed the company to ship its tea directly to America, cutting out the English middlemen and drastically lowering the price. For the first time, colonists would be able to buy high-quality, legal British tea at a price that was even cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea that was so popular in the colonies. From the perspective of London, it was a win-win. The East India Company would be saved, and the colonists would get cheap tea. What could possibly be wrong with that? Everything. Because the Colonists immediately saw the trap hidden beneath the bargain. The problem was not, and had never been, the price of tea. The problem was the principle. The Tea Act, while lowering the base price of the tea, deliberately left in place the small but deeply hated tax that had been imposed by the Townshend Acts years earlier. The colonists understood the game that Parliament was playing. This was a test. The British government was trying to trick them, to seduce them with cheap tea into accepting the tax. If they bought the tea, if they paid the tax, even the tiny tax that was attached to it, they would be admitting that Parliament had the right to tax them without their consent. They would be surrendering the very principle they had been fighting for over a decade. To them, accepting this tea was not a matter of economics, it was a matter of liberty. It was a line in the sand. News of the Tea Act spread through the colonies like a summer brush fire. The reaction was swift and furious. Colonial merchants, who had made their living importing and selling tea, were enraged. They saw the East India Company's monopoly as a direct threat to their livelihoods, a move that would drive them out of business and crush local trade. Patriots and political leaders raged against the deceptive nature of the act. They saw it as further proof of British arrogance, another sign that the Crown believed it could manipulate and control them as it pleased. Refusing the tea became a matter of honor, a test of one's commitment to the cause of American liberty. In Boston, the city that was already a hotbed of revolutionary fervor, the reaction was particularly intense. The citizens of Boston, still scarred by the memory of the Boston Massacre, recognized the Tea Act for what it was, a Trojan horse. Public meetings were called, and the halls swelled with angry voices. Newspapers were filled with articles denouncing the act and calling for a united front against it. Groups like the Sons of Liberty, led by passionate organizers like Samuel Adams and John Hancock, swung into action. They organized a massive boycott, getting merchants and citizens to pledge that not a single chest of the East India Company's tea would be landed, sold, or consumed in their city. As the ships carrying the controversial tea began to arrive in American ports, they were met with organized resistance. In cities like New York and Philadelphia, patriots and committees of correspondence successfully intimidated the ship captains and the tea consignees, the local merchants who had been chosen to sell the tea. The ships were forced to turn around and sail back to England with their cargo still in their holds. The message sent from these ports was clear and unambiguous. We will not be bribed into sacrificing our rights. But in Boston, the situation played out differently, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation. The royal governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, was a staunch loyalist, a man determined to uphold British law at all costs. He was not going to be intimidated by mobs or fiery speeches. When the first of the 3 tea ships, a vessel named the Dartmouth, arrived in Boston Harbor, Hutchinson refused to allow it to leave. He insisted that the tea must be unloaded and the tax paid, as the law required. Soon, 2 more ships, the Eleanor and the Beaver, arrived and anchored alongside the Dartmouth. The city of Boston and the royal governor were now locked in a tense and dangerous standoff. The colonists refused to allow the tea to be brought ashore. The governor refused to allow the ships to sail away. The ships sat there in the harbor, their holds filled with the tea that was now a symbol of a deep, and seemingly unresolvable conflict. The tension was becoming unbearable, a tightly wound spring that was about to snap. A single act, a single decision would break the deadlock, and in doing so, would change the world forever. Let your mind drift peacefully on the waters of Boston Harbor. The year is 1773. The air is crisp with the coming of winter, and the city of Boston is a powder keg waiting for a spark. As the three British tea ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, sit stubbornly at anchor, their controversial cargo held hostage by the deadlock, the city itself transforms. Every day that the ships remain in the harbor, the tension in the city tightens like a knot. This is no longer just a protest. Boston is preparing itself for a confrontation. In the cozy, firelit taverns where men gather after a long day's work, in the cold, high-ceilinged churches, and in the bustling public squares, there is only one topic of conversation: the tea. What is to be done? How can they defy the will of a king and a parliament an ocean away? The air is thick with debate, with anger, and with a growing sense of shared purpose. The Sons of Liberty, the secret engine of the resistance, are working tirelessly. Fiery and charismatic leaders like the passionate orator Samuel Adams, the wealthy merchant John Hancock, and the skilled silversmith and messenger Paul Revere are moving swiftly to organize and channel the city's outrage. They are masters of public opinion. They print and distribute pamphlets. They post broadsides on public buildings calling on all citizens to stand firm and boycott the vile British tea. And they organize a series of massive public meetings. These meetings are held at Faneuil Hall, but the crowds that turn up are so enormous that they have to be moved to the largest building in the city, the old South Meeting House. Thousands of people cram into the wooden pews of the great hall, their numbers so great that they spill out into the street outside. Imagine the scene. Farmers who have walked for miles from the surrounding countryside, artisans in their leather aprons, merchants in their fine coats, sailors, laborers, people from every walk of life standing shoulder to shoulder, united in their defiance. Inside the meeting house, the air is electric. The breath of the massive crowd fogs the cold air. One speaker after another rises to address the assembly, their voices echoing through the vast space. They speak of liberty, of their rights as Englishmen, and of the tyranny of being taxed by a government in which they have no voice. Each speech adds more fuel to the fire. Each resolution passed, each vote taken to prevent the unloading of the tea, feels like another hammer blow against the authority of the British Crown. But while the people of Boston are united in their resolve, they are also caught in a trap. The clock is ticking. According to British law, the owner of a ship that arrives in port has 20 days to unload its cargo and pay the required customs duties. If, at the end of those 20 days, the cargo has not been unloaded, customs officials have the legal right to seize it, unload it themselves, and sell it at auction to pay the tax. The deadline for the first ship, the Dartmouth, is December 17th. The Sons of Liberty understand the dire implications of this deadline. Once the tea is ashore and the tax is paid, even if it is paid by force, their protest will have failed. The principle will be lost. This is no longer just about preventing the consumption of tea. It is about preventing the payment of the tax at all costs. It has become a defining moment, a test of whether they will submit to being treated as mere subjects, or whether they will stand up and fight for their future as free men. Adding to the pressure is the unyielding stance of the royal governor, Thomas Hutchinson. He is determined not to back down. He sees the protests not as a legitimate expression of grievance, but as the illegal actions of an unruly mob. He refuses all requests from the colonists to grant the ships a pass to leave the harbor and return to England with the tea. He orders that the ships are not to be allowed to leave until their cargo is unloaded. To enforce his will, he orders 2 British warships to anchor at the entrance to the harbor, their cannons a silent and menacing threat. To Governor Hutchinson, this is a matter of law and order. To back down would be to admit that the mob, and not the king's appointed government, is in control of the colony. The standoff in Boston has become a spectacle, watched with rapt attention by all the other colonies. Every man, woman, and child in the city can feel the weight of this moment. There is a feeling in the cold winter air, a palpable sense of anticipation, like the deep, quiet stillness that comes just before a great storm breaks. It is clear that talking is no longer enough. Petitions and resolutions have failed. A decision has to be made. And somewhere in the secret meetings of the Sons of Liberty, in the crowded taverns and the quiet back rooms, a new and radical plan is beginning to take shape. It is a plan born of desperation and defiance. A plan that will not just send a message, but will create an explosion that will be heard across the ocean and echo down through the ages. Breathe in deeply, my friend, and then exhale slowly, letting go of all the day's concerns. Let us drift together into the heart of a cold, historic night. The day of December 16th, 1773, dawns gray and chilling over the city of Boston. This is it, the day of reckoning. For nearly 3 weeks, the city has been holding its breath, and now the final deadline has arrived. The 20-day period for the first tea ship, the Dartmouth, is about to expire. Everyone in Boston knows what this means. At midnight, the law will take over. Customs officials, backed by the authority of the Crown and the presence of British troops, will be legally empowered to seize the tea, bring it ashore by force, and collect the hated tax. If that happens, the colonists' long principled stand will have been for nothing. Their claim to the right of self-governance, their cry of no taxation without representation, will be rendered meaningless. That morning, the city is a hive of activity and nervous energy. A massive meeting is called at the Old South Meeting House, and once again, it is filled to overflowing. Thousands of people have gathered, some having walked for miles through the icy December air to be a part of this pivotal moment. The hall is so packed that the crowd spills out into the surrounding streets, the people straining to hear the voices of the speakers from inside. Samuel Adams, his face grim with the weight of the moment, presides over the gathering. For hours, speaker after speaker rises to denounce the Tea Act and the tyranny of the governor. The mood in the hall is a mixture of defiance and a deep, underlying anxiety. They are on the brink of something, but no one is quite sure what it is. How can they stop the tea from landing without starting an all-out war with the most powerful empire on Earth? Throughout the long, tense afternoon, they make one last, desperate attempt at a peaceful resolution. They send the owner of the Dartmouth to make a final appeal to Governor Hutchinson, begging him to relent and grant the ship a pass to sail back to England. But as the afternoon light begins to fade, a rider gallops back with the grim news. The governor has not moved. His answer is a final, emphatic no. The ships will not leave. The law will be enforced. A wave of fury ripples through the massive crowd. The walls of the Old South Meeting House seem to vibrate with the collective anger. It is in this moment that Samuel Adams stands and speaks the words that will serve as the secret signal for what is to come. He looks out over the sea of faces and declares with a calm finality, "This meeting can do nothing more to save the country." It is a simple sentence, but its meaning is electrifying. The time for talking is over. The time for action has arrived. As if on cue, a series of whoops and cries, imitating the war cries of Mohawk warriors, echoes from the back of the meeting house and from the street outside. It is the signal. The meeting dissolves into a flurry of organized activity. Small groups of men from the Sons of Liberty begin to move purposefully toward the harbor. As they go, they quickly pull on their disguises. They are not elaborate costumes. They smear their faces with soot and coal dust. They wrap themselves in old blankets, and some stick a few feathers in their caps. This disguise is not meant to fool anyone into thinking they are actual Native Americans. It is symbolic. It is a way of casting off their identities as British subjects and adopting a new identity, that of a free and defiant American, a symbol of a people who will not be tamed. Under the cloak of the deepening twilight, dozens and then over 100 of these disguised men make their way to Griffin's Wharf, where the 3 tea ships bob gently in the cold, dark water. There is a remarkable sense of order and purpose to their actions. This is not a chaotic, drunken mob. This is a disciplined, quasi-military operation, carried out with a calm and silent precision. Armed with axes and hatchets, they swarm aboard the 3 ships, easily overpowering the small crews on duty. They do no harm to the sailors. They are simply moved aside and told to stand and watch. The mission has one target, and one target only: the tea. For the next 3 hours, the night is filled with the rhythmic sound of splintering wood. The men work tirelessly, hoisting the heavy wooden chests from the ship's holds onto the decks. With swift, practiced blows of their hatchets, they smash open the chests and then heave them and their contents over the railings and into the black water of the harbor. A huge crowd of spectators gathers on the wharf, watching the scene in hushed awe. The air grows thick with the sharp, fragrant smell of the destroyed tea. Chest after chest is broken and dumped. In total, 342 chests of tea, the entire shipment from all 3 ships, are sent to the bottom of the harbor. It is an immense fortune in tea, thousands of pounds worth of the East India Company's property, now floating in the salty water. The discipline of the men is extraordinary. Nothing else on the ships is touched. No cargo is stolen or damaged. One of the participants even finds a broken padlock that was not his own and replaces it the next day. This is an act of political protest, not of theft. When the work is done, when every last chest of tea has been destroyed, the men quietly disperse, melting back into the dark streets of Boston from which they came. They leave behind a harbor that looks like a giant, swirling teapot, and a powerful, unmistakable message of defiance that will soon echo across an ocean. Drift deeper now, my friend, into the peaceful quiet of your rest. Let the story unfold like a gentle dream. The long night of defiance in Boston is over. As the sun rises on the morning of December 17th, it reveals a strange and startling sight. Boston Harbor has been transformed into a vast, swirling teapot. Great mats of tea leaves and the splintered remains of 342 chests of tea float upon the tide, staining the water a dark brown. The sharp, salty smell of the sea is mingled with the strong, fragrant aroma of tea, a scent that hangs heavy over the entire city. News of the night's events spreads through the city and then through the colonies with incredible speed. For the Patriots, the destruction of the tea, as they called it, is a source of immense pride. It is a bold, heroic act, a sign that ordinary Americans have the courage to stand up to the mightiest empire on earth in defense of their liberties. But for the Loyalists and more moderate colonists, the event is a source of horror and fear. They see it as a reckless and dangerous act of vandalism, a destruction of private property that has crossed a line from which there is no turning back. When word of what happened in Boston finally crosses the Atlantic and reaches London, the reaction is not one of negotiation or understanding. It is one of swift and unified fury. From the members of Parliament to the King himself, the British leadership is utterly outraged. They do not see the Boston Tea Party as a political protest. They see it as an act of open rebellion, a brazen and insulting challenge to the authority of the Crown and the laws of the British Empire. King George III is said to have become cold with anger, convinced that the time for leniency is over. The colonies, and Boston in particular, must be punished. They must be brought to heel, and an example must be made of them to deter any other colony from entertaining similar ideas of defiance. And so, in the early months of 1774, Parliament passes a series of laws designed to do just that. These laws are so harsh, so punitive, that the colonists will come to call them the Intolerable Acts. They are not meant to resolve the conflict. They are meant to crush the spirit of Massachusetts. The first and most devastating blow is the Boston Port Act. In one fell swoop, Parliament orders the complete closure of the Port of Boston to all shipping and all trade. The harbor, the economic lifeblood of the city, is to be sealed off by a naval blockade until the citizens of Boston pay the British East India Company for the full value of the destroyed tea. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. The bustling wharves fall silent. Ships are forbidden to enter or leave. Trade grinds to a halt. Soon, food and supplies begin to dwindle, and thousands of people, sailors, dock workers, merchants, are thrown out of work. The city is being slowly starved into submission. But the punishment does not end there. The Massachusetts Government Act effectively cancels the colony's charter and strips it of its right to self-government. The colonists can no longer elect their own officials. From now on, they will be ruled by a governor and council appointed directly by the king. Town meetings, the very heart of New England democracy, are severely restricted. Next comes the Administration of Justice Act, which the colonists scornfully call the Murder Act. This law states that any British official accused of committing a crime while performing his duties in Massachusetts can be sent to England for trial. The colonists see this as a green light for British officials to act with impunity, knowing they will never face a jury of their colonial peers. Finally, a new Quartering Act is passed, which gives the royal governor the authority to house British soldiers in private homes, inns, and other buildings if suitable barracks are not provided. The message behind this flood of legislation is brutally clear. Massachusetts is no longer a colony to be negotiated with. It is a rebellious territory to be occupied and subdued. Liberty, as the colonists know it, is a privilege that the Crown has decided to revoke. But Parliament, in its anger, has made a monumental miscalculation. They believed that by making such a harsh example of Boston, they would frighten the other 12 colonies into quiet submission. They thought the other colonies would see what happened to Massachusetts and think twice before challenging British authority. They could not have been more wrong. The intolerable acts have the exact opposite effect. Instead of isolating Boston, the punishment unites the colonies in a way that years of pamphlets and speeches never could. News of Boston's suffering spreads, and it is met not with fear, but with a wave of sympathy and righteous anger. Colonists from as far away as South Carolina and Virginia see the attack on Massachusetts' rights as an attack on their own. They realize that if Parliament can do this to one colony, it can do it to any of them. And so, a remarkable thing begins to happen. The other colonies begin to rally around their besieged sister. Wagons loaded with food and money begin to make the long journey to Boston from all over the continent, a lifeline to help the city survive the blockade. Letters of support and pledges of solidarity are sent from colonial assemblies up and down the coast. What had started as a Boston problem has now become an American problem. In trying to stamp out the embers of rebellion in one city, Britain has unwittingly fanned them into a flame that is now beginning to burn brightly from New Hampshire to Georgia. The intolerable acts, meant to be a symbol of British power, have instead become a symbol of British tyranny, a rallying cry that will unite a continent and set it on a path to revolution. And so, my dear friend, our journey is nearing its end. As you drift on the edge of sleep, let this final part of the story be a gentle conclusion. A tale of how a single act of defiance rippled outward, uniting a divided people and setting the stage for the birth of a new nation. The punishment of Boston, intended by the British to be a chilling lesson in obedience, instead becomes a powerful catalyst for unity. The shock waves from the intolerable acts travel far beyond the blockaded harbor of Massachusetts. Across the 13 colonies, a profound shift in thinking is taking place. For years, the colonies had been like a collection of quarrelsome cousins, separated by vast distances, different economies, and distinct cultural identities. A farmer in Virginia had little in common with a merchant in Boston or a fisherman in Rhode Island. But when Parliament shut down Boston's port and dismantled its government, colonists everywhere saw a reflection of their own potential fate. They understood, with a sudden and chilling clarity, that the rights they held so dear were not guaranteed. If the liberties of Massachusetts could be erased with the stroke of a pen, then so could the liberties of any other colony. An attack on one was now truly seen as an attack on all. From the rice plantations of South Carolina to the forests of New Hampshire, the response is one of solidarity. It is a quiet, grassroots movement of support. Town meetings are held, resolutions of sympathy are passed, and committees of correspondence work day and night, sharing news and coordinating a unified response. The fight is no longer just Boston's fight. It has become America's fight. In this atmosphere of crisis and common cause, a truly unprecedented event is organized. A call goes out for a Continental Congress, a meeting of delegates from all the colonies to discuss a unified path forward. And so, in September of 1774, the First Continental Congress convenes in the city of Philadelphia. Imagine that room. For the very first time, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies, only Georgia does not send a delegate, are gathered under one roof. These are men who, just a few years earlier, were strangers to one another, leaders in their own separate provinces. Now, men like the reserved Virginia planter George Washington, the fiery orator Patrick Henry, and the brilliant Massachusetts lawyers John Adams and Samuel Adams are sitting together, not as Virginians or Pennsylvanians or New Englanders, but as architects of a new, shared American identity. Their goal, at this point, is still not a formal declaration of independence. The vast majority of the delegates still consider themselves loyal British subjects and hope for a peaceful reconciliation with the mother country. They are there to petition the king, to explain their grievances, and to ask for a restoration of their rights. But beneath these official proceedings, a much deeper transformation is taking place. In their debates and their private conversations, they are discovering their common ground. They are realizing that they are stronger together than they are apart. They agree to a comprehensive, continent-wide boycott of all British goods, a powerful economic weapon designed to put pressure on Parliament. They pledge their mutual support, vowing to stand together in the face of any further British aggression. And in taverns and coffeehouses across the colonies, ordinary people begin to speak in a new language. Words that had once been used only by radical thinkers, words like unity, resistance, and liberty, are now on everyone's lips. In trying to bring its iron fist down on Boston, Britain had not crushed a rebellion. It had inadvertently forged a nation. It had welded 13 separate and often competing colonies into something new, something far more powerful and dangerous to British rule. A people who were beginning to think of themselves as Americans. The night that the tea sank into the cold waters of Boston Harbor was more than just the destruction of cargo. It was the destruction of an illusion. The illusion that the American colonies would remain docile and profitable subjects of a distant empire forever. The Boston Tea Party lit a spark, and the intolerable acts meant to extinguish that spark, instead acted like a wind, fanning it into an uncontrollable fire that would soon spread across the entire continent. In the months that follow the Congress, the colonies begin to quietly prepare for the worst. Local militias, made up of ordinary farmers and townsmen, begin to drill on their village greens. Secret stashes of weapons and gunpowder are hidden away in barns and cellars. The winds of revolution are no longer just stirring. They are gathering into a storm, and it is now too late for anyone to stop it. The journey from protest to revolution is almost complete. It began with a matter of principle. It was ignited by a defiant act on a cold winter's night, and it was forged in the fire of a shared sense of injustice. The Boston Tea Party was not the beginning of the war, but it was the beginning of the end of the old world. It was the moment when a group of determined people chose defiance over fear, and in doing so, set in motion the events that would lead to the birth of a nation. And now, my friend, our story is done. may you drift into a deep and peaceful sleep, carried on the gentle echoes of history.